So thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for joining us later if you are, in fact, watching this recording at some future time. Welcome to September. For those of us in the desert, it's still hot, but not quite as hot. And there is a promise of more rain and cooler temperatures eventually. And for most people who pay attention, we can see that the seasons are starting to change, even if only that the sunrise is happening a little bit later in the morning and the sun is setting a little earlier in the evening. And we experience this slow and steady shift every single year. And it signals the time of beginning again, maybe at a higher level, maybe not. So I want to start with a question for you to think about. It sounds like a trick question, but it's really not. Do we automatically improve or grow year by year? The answer kind of depends on what I mean and what you mean by improving and growing. And it depends on what our understanding is and our expectation is of our own spiritual development. A couple of weeks ago, I made an analogy, a comparison between the way a parent views their child or children playing outside and the story we tell ourselves about good guys and bad guys. The parent doesn't care, doesn't worry about whether the child is the good guy or the bad guy, the hero or the villain in the role-playing games. Only whether they're out playing, enjoying their friends, being creative and inventive. And in my mind, the divine has that same perspective on each of us. Every single one of us already lives complete, whole, and perfect in the mind of God. And there's some part of us that remembers that divine essence, that core that lives in each one of us. And we get to choose how we show up, how we engage, how we interact, how we presence ourselves in the world, how we engage with our friends and our maybe not so much friends, and how we engage with our environment. And there's nothing in any rule book that says we have to grow up and mature. We can choose to live our lives immaturely. It's a choice. Whether it's a useful choice or not is a different question, but it is a choice. And most of the people who find their way to this philosophy are really interested in experiencing more life, a deeper awareness, a higher understanding, a greater understanding, a broader perspective. So most people who find their way to this teaching are interested in picking themselves up from a not as useful way of being. Some people don't even know that's possible because they've never learned it. They've never understood it. They've never realized that such a thing could happen. And way back when in the class Foundations of the Science of Mind, one of the questions that's asked toward the end of the 13-week period is, why am I having these same experiences again? And the answer basically comes down to, we choose to repeat experiences in different ways, at deeper levels, until we've squeezed all possible benefit, all possible learning out of it. The practitioners that I've known over the years jokingly call it peeling the onion, because there's always another level or another angle, another way of seeing those experiences that we've not thought of before, and a new level of awareness to be had. Dr. Holmes wrote it this way in The Science of Mind on page 336. Our individualized universe is forever complete, yet forever completing itself, in order that every experience may teach us to transcend some previous one in ever-ascending cycles, upward bound. He's making the assumption that people actually want to grow. And then on page 439, he also wrote, continually, we must expect new revelations of old truths. We should never lose sight of the fact that the soul is on a pathway of an endless and ever-expanding experience, and only by expansion can it evolve. This does not mean we should cast away any good the old has to offer, but that we convert it to greater good, accepting the lessons and experiences of the past and taking the best from everything. We should press boldly forward, looking ever for the truth and ever ascending higher and higher into the heavens of reality. And after a fashion, we can choose to be always aware, whatever's going on in our lives, that we have the opportunity to see those life experiences and to always choose to be learning, expanding, and growing. And we don't have to. So why do we bother? Why is it worth our while to do that? I can't answer that for you. I can only answer it for me. And for me, I want to understand how my world works and how I can make it work better, more in alignment with what I desire and how I see life unfolding for the greater good of the greatest number of people. And so I study my own experiences and how I see them and how I feel them. And then I choose to learn from them. So maybe I don't have to revisit the parts that weren't very much fun. How about you? In yesterday's daily morning practice, I read a piece written by Augusta Rundell. She was a contemporary and student of Dr. Holmes. She trained as a practitioner. She headed up the health department of the Religious Science Institute for a bunch of years. She wrote about our relationship to fear and what we can learn from it and how we can learn to deal with it. She was a complete pragmatist and really liked long sentences. That's kind of a warning. She wrote, fear is a state of mind, a state of consciousness, which is so subtle in its influence that it wraps itself around us, befogs our reason, clouds our vision, and dulls our hearing, rendering us unable to get the proper perspective of life. Sounds like something we want to be rid of, right? She continues, we are told that what we fear comes upon us, but we are not shown that what is known as fear produces a mental pattern or mold, which creative mind fills, producing on the physical plane that which we have so perfectly pictured on the mental. She's using way too many words, but what she wrote is she's describing this automatic process, cause and effect, right? That what we think that cause must create in our experience. And it creates not from the random thoughts, but in those thoughts that we persistently think. So if we're focused, if we're meditating, heavens, on fear, worry, doubt, uncertainty, unpleasantness, grumpiness, unfriendliness, etc., then those are what have to show up in our mind, in our lives. Because that's the thing we're putting our attention on. And it will happen as many times as it needs to, as we need it to, for us to notice that there's a connection between what we think and what we experience. How's that for peeling the onion? This technique, practice when we use it on purpose, is called creating a mental equivalent. The bad news is we're always creating a mental equivalent. The important piece of this is we get to decide, or we can decide, what that mental equivalent is and what it's for and how we choose to experience our lives. And so in this repeated process of being alive, we get to look at our lives, decide if we're having the experience we want. And if not, we get to pick a different mental equivalent by picking a different thought to have and to be persistent in holding or repeating. This is the value of mantras. This is the value of affirmations. This is the value of vision and visualizing. This is the value of vision boards. Anything that reminds us to keep our focus on the good that we choose helps us create that mental equivalent that moves us in the direction we want to go. And when we don't have an experience that works like we want it, there's not a, well, maybe there is for a moment, but there's not much use in beating ourselves up about that. Rather, picking ourselves up and rearranging our thinking, rearranging our way of being in the world, rearranging our way of seeing our experiences, knowing that what we think persistently, consistently must come to pass in our experience. And what I know is, as I consistently train my mind to think in the way that it is beneficial for it to go, then I have a different experience. I have a different perception. I have a different perspective. And I generally have a different experience. This morning, I dropped a glass on the kitchen counter and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. That wasn't fun. And I was a little bit shocked because it was really, really early. And I was pleased is the wrong word, but I was kind of pleased because I didn't default to, how clumsy are you to drop a glass unloading the dishwasher? I was really, really happy, I guess, with myself because I didn't default to that negative, demeaning, demanding, nasty person that I have been. Like, wow, I liked that glass. Oh, well, now I get to clean it up. And so that to me was a very present reminder of the ability we each have all the time to converse with our experience and see how we have shifted or have not shifted our internal dialogue and make adjustments if we're not in the place we want to be. So back to Augusta. She wrote, and I love this part. This is the part that the group yesterday morning really liked too. She wrote about one technique we can do when we discover a subtle, partially hidden fear. And she wrote, we can drag this partially hidden fear out of its hiding place and focus our objective reasoning on it. She's then said to picture it as a monster, big and weird, with claws, devouring the sweetness and vital force within us, depleting our vitality. But she didn't stop there. She continued, Having been brought to a realization of its power, we could then, in our imagination, take a mental club and drive out this grotesque apparition, close the gate of understanding against it, and rid ourselves of it for all time. We see the fear for what it is, an apparition. We made it up, an ugly monster we created, and we put it out of our minds permanently. And when it comes knocking on our doors again, we don't answer. Like, nobody's home, go away. I am done with you. I say it like that, like it's easy. It's not easy. And yet it's possible because we can shift our way of being. What does it take to not repeat old patterns? Practice, 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 practice. And after we've let the bad habit come back a couple times and had to chase it out a couple times, we'll start to recognize it. We'll start to see it. We'll start to say, I recognize you. I see you. I'm done. And we quit falling for that trick. And it may come knocking again, just to be sure. But there's nothing in us that requires us to comply with its desires to be an irritant. So last week, I started working on my part of the annual report for our annual meeting that's coming up. And one of the things I get to do is to look back over the classes we've done this past year and the books that we've studied. And one of the gifts I discovered was the last book that Keith Gorley facilitated a class on, Frederick Bale's Hidden Power for Human Problems. Some of y'all were in that class. It seems like a long time ago, but that class actually ended in December, 8 months ago. And in looking at the books that Frederick Bales had written, I found a little pamphlet called Mopers, Hopers, Gropers, and Dopers. And I just had to order it. It came yesterday in the mail. Turns out it's a transcript of a talk that he gave in 1949 at the Fox Wilshire Theater in LA. His opening paragraph: humans face problems from the moment of their birth. Problems are part of life in a universe based on law. If it were a universe of whim and caprice, some could gain freedom from pain and sorrow by wriggling into the good graces of the powers that be. But in a cosmos where every atom is bound by immutable law, and whose principle is order and harmony, problems are merely situations in which one has failed to understand and master the law. The apprentice's insoluble problem is easily solved by the adept journeyman. Therefore, in one sense, there are no problems, only varying levels of understanding. Or as Maya Angelou said, one of my favorite quotes of hers, when we know better, we do better. And every single individual gets to decide, gets to define what better means for them and act accordingly. So I want to close by repeating the spiritual thought I read earlier today, and then a poem by poet John Rodell, who visited us back in December. First, the spiritual thought from Dr. Ernest Holmes, Science of Mind, page 434. We are free souls, free spirits. And because this is true, our thought has creative power. And since it has this power, we must carefully choose what we are to think. For everything moves in circles. And then from John Rodell, a poem, prose poem, called Nothing to Cure. It's a conversation between him and God. John, hey, God. God, hey, John. John, cure autism. God, no. Why? There's nothing to cure. Huh? Autistic people aren't broken. They aren't sick. They're just people singing a beautiful song with lyrics that are foreign to you. But sometimes I don't understand the song my son is singing. That's okay. Forget the lyrics. Just sit back and enjoy the melody. I don't like to see him struggle. God, all flowers struggle just before they blossom. John, but if you won't cure autism, what will you do? God, I'll have to help you cure something else. What is that? Ignorance. When we don't feel like we have a handle on our life because things aren't working like we want, we're staring at ignorance. We're looking at our world with apprentice's eyes instead of someone skilled with understanding the way the world works. Our job, if we have one, if we choose to take it, is to see the world as God sees it, where nothing is wrong, things are just misunderstood or misapplied. And this is a continuous process. And it's one we get to do over and over and over again as we progress, as we move through this time and space, this thing called life. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So I'm going to roll into the prayer. If I said something useful for you, hold that in your mind while I speak these words of affirmation. I recognize that one life lives in, as, and through me, is in, as, and through all beings. I recognize it moves at the speed of love, and that all life is included, that all beings are included, all experiences are included, and that every single thing in life is for my awakening, for our development, for our enlivenment, for our continued awareness, expansion, growth. And it's already been given, it's already available, it's already present. And each one of us has the opportunity at all times to choose to see it, to choose to engage, to choose to see those experiences of our lives and remember to see them with God eyes. Remember to see them through the eyes of love and life and joy and harmony and greater order. And so when I forget, I catch myself and I remember to refocus. I remember to take another look, to take another shot at seeing this world as delightful, as marvelous, as extraordinary, as goodness itself. And I know that truth for me and for all. Resting in the truth of those words, I let them be. And so it is.